Hi, welcome back. In today's lesson, we are starting with our second unit and we're going to look at classical civilizations. So that means ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Today we'll get started with ancient Greece. We're going to look at some of the physical characteristics of the geography of the land and talk about how that starts to shape what ancient Greece looks like, and some of the political developments, how they started to merge into city-states and develop some of their ancient mythology. So make sure you're on page 2 of your interactive notebook and follow along. Okay, so again, we're on page 2 of your interactive notebook and we're talking about ancient Greece. So our essential question for this first set, we are going to start to have some essential questions so that we can kind of focus our learning. So today's essential question is, how did the physical geography contribute to the political development in ancient Greece? If you don't know, Greece was the birthplace of democracy and kind of how modern government has shaped itself. So we're going to kind of backtrack and look at some of the things that kind of influenced them to do that. And we're not going to necessarily talk all about democracy today, but we're going to kind of build upon it and we'll talk more about it in later episodes. So let's talk about the physical geography of Greece. And I'm not going to say ancient Greece because it's still this is still the physical geography. It hasn't changed. But Greece is basically, there's mainland Greece, and then there's a collection of 2,000 islands that kind of form off of its peninsula. This is basically an area where there were like-minded people, or like-speaking, I should say, not like-minded necessarily, but they all spoke Greek, and they come together and they unify themselves as being known as Greece. So the proximity of the sea, because again, this is a peninsula, and then like we said, a chain of islands, and also a lack of resources actually leads the Greeks to use the sea as their best friend. It encourages sea travel and also trade to get to other civilizations during this time period. Just like we talked about with those ancient river valley civilizations, water was their friend at this time. You know, think of it as their major route for transportation and navigating to find other cultures, other cities, other civilizations to get different resources. One of the big problems with Greece is that it's very mountainous, and that causes challenges because it slows down travel. I don't know if any of you have tried to kind of hurdle over a mountain lately, but they're difficult to travel, especially in ancient times. But it also divides the land into regions. And so that's going to set up kind of our first taste of why we need different types of governments, why later down the pike we see democracy develop. But it sets up this need for little tiny populations to come together and live together and create kind of like colonies, or actually we're going to talk later that they form into city-states. So again, the mountainous regions, they start to collect together because they can't really support, the whole country can't support itself. They have to kind of like, as they're called, city-states, these little individual states. The land was also very infertile. There was only, I think the statistic is there was about a quarter of the land in Greece was actually farmable. So obviously that's going to cause some difficulties when trying to feed the population. So again, water was their best friend. They rely a lot on fishing and, sea life, seafood. That's kind of one of the staples of the diet in ancient Greece. So the first civilizations that pop up in Greece were actually known as the Mycenaeans. So about 2000 BCE, they pop up. They were a group of Indo-Europeans. Indo-Europeans were basically a collection of people they were like nomads who had been traveling throughout like modern day northern India, kind of moving towards current day Turkey, towards current day Greece. So they're kind of roaming around, and they end up settling in mainland Greece. They become, as I said, known as the Mycenaeans, and they name themselves that after their leading city, Mycenae. I think that's how it's pronounced. Bear with me, guys. Pronunciation is tough sometimes, but we're going to muscle through it. So they are there from about 1600 BCE to 1100 BCE. They are dominated by their warrior kings. And about 1200 that's when the civilization starts collapsing. So again, it says 1600 to 1100. There's about a 100-year gap there where they're kind of hanging on, but by 1200 BC, they're starting to slow down, and they're replaced by another group known as the Dorians. The Dorians weren't as advanced as the Mycenaeans. They don't last very long. Their economy quickly collapses. They didn't trade very well. And there's not much known about this time period because they actually kind of, as the book says, they lost the art of writing. So they don't actually keep a written record. And you'll remember, part of civilization, one of our 5 characteristics of civilization is keeping a written record. So there's not much known about this time period because there isn't much left. What we do know about this time period a little bit, it was kind of more word of mouth. So things that were passed down generation to generation from, tales and stories that were told. One of the book talks about a guy named Homer, not Simpson. He was a writer at the time period, during this time period, and he creates the Odyssey, the Iliad, some very famous Greek works, and his stories kind of get passed down, and others like him. So it's not quite reliable information when we have word of mouth, but some of these tales get passed down and have some truth to them. Some of them don't. But again, that's the importance of having a written record. It shows what happened, who did what, so that later generations can look back and reflect. Last thing to talk about the ancient Greeks during this time period is that they do come up with their own Greek myths. We talked about with our ancient river valley civilizations that they were polytheistic. The Greeks are the same. Remember, polytheistic is believing in more than one god. So they come up with their own myths, which are basically their stories that they pass down about different gods and goddesses. And it's ways in which that they seek to understand life as they know it at this time. Why do the seasons change? They had a story for that, and they had a god, I think it's a goddess, who was in charge of the changing seasons. So this was their way of interpreting what's going on around them. Just like we talked about with the Egyptians and the Mesopotamians, the idea that, it flooded too much, we pissed off this god or that god. Same idea with the Greeks, but they just have their own. So they do give them like human-esque qualities. These gods, they love, they hate, they're jealous, they war, they fight, they compete. Jealousy is a big one. But there's all kinds of different gods. Some of the top ones, though, to talk about the leader of the gods, they all live on Mount Olympus, which was a fictional, or I guess we'll say fictional because they're myths. A mythical place. It's not a real place, so to say. But Mount Olympus is where the gods lived. The ruler of the gods was known as Zeus, and his wife was Hera. So they're kind of the king and the queen of the gods, we'll say. But there's a whole slew of other ones that I'm sure you've all heard of. You might have seen movies, things about that. But mythology was huge to the Greeks, and we're also going to see how mythology plays a role with the Romans when we talk about them later. So again, we've been talking in this video about how the physical geography of Greece starts to lead them into the need or the necessity for city-states, looking a little bit at their culture with their myths, and talking about how their civilization got their start. So in our next episode, we are going to talk more about those individual city-states, and we'll talk about 2 of the biggest ones, Athens and Sparta. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for watching.